and thousands behind him come down the hill.
What does it take to frighten a man who has already won everything? A major champion knows pressure. He knows noise. He knows the feeling of a tournament closing in around him. But there was a time in golf when even those men felt something different. It happened early in the week. The morning air was still cool. Practice rounds were ending. Players were loose, smiling, talking about weather pin positions, little things men talk about when they believe the week still belongs to everyone. Then Tiger Woods arrived. The crowd moved first. Heads turned next. Then came that strange silence great athletes always notice. Conversations shortened. Smiles faded. Practice swings became quicker, tighter, less certain. No score had been posted. No shot had been struck. Yet something had already changed. That was the real weight of Tiger Woods. The trophies came later. The red shirts came later. The Sunday roars came later. First came the feeling. A tournament that belonged to everyone on Wednesday somehow felt like his by Thursday morning. Years later, some of the greatest golfers who ever lived tried to explain what it was like to face him. A few found the words. Most did not. Because how do you describe a man who could take confidence from the best players in the world without touching them? To understand Tiger Woods, you cannot begin with the victories. You have to begin with the fear. Long before the records were counted, before the Sunday roars became familiar, before children copied the red shirt and the fist pump, Tiger Woods was already changing people. Not fans, players. That was the difference most of the public never fully saw. The world saw distance off the tee, trophies, television cameras, prize money. A young star rising faster than golf had seen in generations. The men inside the ropes saw something else. They saw discipline that never seemed to blink. They saw a focus that did not drift. They saw a player who treated an ordinary Thursday morning the way others treated the final holes on Sunday. That unsettles professionals more than anger ever could. Talent can be explained. Power can be measured. A hot streak can be waited out. But a man who arrives ready, every day, becomes a different kind of problem. Tiger had been prepared for that life from the beginning. As a child in Southern California, he was introduced to golf before most children can tie their shoes. His father, Earl Woods, believed he was building something rare, not simply a golfer, but a competitor made for pressure. Television audiences saw the smiling child prodigy. Golf would later meet the grown version. By the time Tiger reached college, the talent was no secret. By the time he turned, professional expectation had become national news. Companies rushed toward him. Cameras followed him. Every swing seemed to arrive carrying prediction. That kind of attention usually damages young athletes. It can make them careful. It can make them soft. It can make them grateful just to be included. Tiger seemed to take it as an insult. He entered professional golf with the look of a man who believed he had arrived late and intended to make up for lost time. Many veterans saw confidence. A few saw danger. They were both right. Because the moment the sport truly understood what had entered the room came at Augusta in the spring of 1997. And after that week, nothing in golf felt quite the same again. Augusta National had seen greatness before. It had seen champions in green jackets, Sunday charges, quiet collapses, names that would live for generations. But in the spring of 1997, it saw something else. It saw the future arrive all at once. Tiger Woods was only 21 years old, young enough to still seem new, old enough to know exactly what he wanted. By Sunday evening, the tournament no longer felt like a contest. It felt like a warning. Tiger won the Masters by 12 shots. Take a moment with that number. Over 4 days. On one of the most demanding stages in golf, the second best player in the field finished 12 strokes behind him. That is not the usual language of sport. That is separation. That is a man stepping into a room and discovering he belongs there more than anyone already inside it. The galleries roared, television celebrated. A new era had found its first perfect image. But inside, locker rooms, courtesy cars, hotel rooms, the feeling was different. Professionals do not shock easily. They have seen talent come and go. They know how hype works. They know how quickly golf can humble anyone. This did not feel like hype. This felt permanent. Some understood immediately that Tiger was not simply another young star who had won a major early. He had done something more dangerous. He had made the impossible look repeatable. There have been only rare moments in modern golf when a player crushed a major championship field by 10 shots or more. Tiger Woods would do it more than once. That was the part that chilled people. One extraordinary week can be dismissed. Twice becomes a pattern. The players who had spent years climbing toward the top suddenly faced a harsher truth. The mountain itself had changed. Then came the years that turned fear into routine. From late 1999 into the next decade, Tiger sat at number 1 in the world rankings for stretches so long they began to feel normal. That may sound simple now. At the time, it was exhausting for everyone else, because every tournament began with the same question. Who can beat Tiger this week? And too often, by Sunday afternoon, there was no answer. Then the year 2000 arrived, and even those who thought they understood his greatness were about to feel small again. By the time the calendar turned to 2000, many players had already accepted that Tiger Woods was the best golfer in the world. What they had not accepted was how far ahead he truly was. That summer, the United States Open was played at Pebble Beach, one of the most beautiful courses in America and one of the least forgiving. Pebble Beach has a way of exposing nerves, impatience, any weakness a player brings with him. Tiger brought none. Across 4 days, he was the only man in the field to finish under par. He won by 15 shots, a margin so large it felt almost impolite to the rest of the leaderboard. Records in golf often survive because generations change, equipment changes, conditions change. Too many things must go right for anyone to touch them. Tiger erased one that had stood for more than a century. There are victories that earn applause. This one caused silence, because professionals understood what the public did not. When a player can dominate the hardest tournaments by that kind of distance, the game is no longer asking whether he is great. It is asking how long everyone else must live with him. One future major champion, Michael Campbell, later called Tiger a freak of nature, worlds apart from the rest. That was not jealousy. That was witness testimony. Then came something stranger still. Years later, researchers studied tournament results during Tiger's peak years. They found that when he was in the field, other players often performed worse than expected. Not because he touched their swing, not because he changed the weather, because he was there. Think about what that means. The best players on earth. Men who had trained since childhood. Men who had made fortunes under pressure. What became less effective simply by sharing a golf course with one man. Some called it intimidation. Others called it presence. Whatever name was used, the result stayed the same. Tiger Woods could damage your chances before he ever reached the first green. And for those who stood closest to him, the feeling was sharper still. No one explained that better than a man who spent years trying to catch him. Ernie Els. Ernie Els was no ordinary rival. He was elegant, powerful, gifted in that rare way that makes difficult golf look calm. He won major championships. He carried himself like a man who belonged on every leaderboard he ever touched. In another era, he might have owned more of the game than history now gives him credit for. But he lived in the age of Tiger Woods. Years later, Ernie tried to explain what separated Tiger from the rest. Of all the words he could have chosen, he spoke about the first tee. Most players, he said, use the opening holes to settle in, to feel the speed of the greens, to listen to their swing, to see what kind of day it might become. Tiger did not arrive to settle in. He arrived ready to take the tournament away. Ernie said Tiger looked prepared to strangle the golf course from the very start. That word stayed with people. Strangle. Not outplay, not outlast, not edge past on the final holes. Strangle. It revealed something players understood long before fans did. Tiger treated the opening moments of a round the way others treated the closing moments of a major. There was no easing into battle. There was only battle. That changes the air around a group. It changes the caddy. It changes the pace of conversation. It changes what a simple par feels like on the second hole. Because if one man is already in full flight while others are still warming their nerves, the day begins uneven. Ernie knew this better than most. In the season 2000 alone, he finished runner-up to Tiger in both the United States Open and the Open Championship. That kind of year can break lesser men. For Ernie, it became part of life. He was good enough to beat nearly everyone. Nearly everyone was not Tiger, and Ernie was not the only great player forced into that shadow. Another man would become one of the finest golfers of his generation, win 6 major championships, and still spend much of his prime being measured against the same name. That man was Phil Mickelson. Phil Mickelson was the kind of player every generation hopes to claim as its own. Gifted hands, bold imagination, a left-handed swing that looked creative where others looked mechanical. Crowds loved him because he played with risk, with flair, with the feeling that something unusual might happen at any moment. In many careers, that would have been enough to make him the central figure of his time. But Phil's prime years ran beside Tiger Woods. That is a sentence easy to read and difficult to live. Phil would go on to win 6 major championships and dozens of tour events. He built a career that in most eras would have stood alone in sunlight. Instead, much of it unfolded in shadow. When Phil won, people asked what it meant for Tiger. When Phil lost, people compared him to Tiger. When Phil moved closer to the summit, Tiger often seemed to move the summit itself. That is a different kind of rivalry. Not one built on hatred, one built on distance. Phil was not being held down by failure. He was being held down by greatness living next door. And yet, to his credit, he kept coming. Year after year, tournament after tournament. In a sport where confidence can disappear quietly, Phil kept walking back into rooms already occupied by the most intimidating figure in the game. That alone says something about him. Because many players of that era were not beaten only by scores. They were worn down by repetition. Another Sunday with Tiger near the lead. Another week with cameras following the same red shirt. Another leaderboard where first place felt familiar before the final round even began. Still, Phil endured long enough to see something few thought possible. Tiger falling, the body breaking down, scandal swallowing headlines, surgeries piling one upon another. The certainty that once followed Tiger into every event began to fade. For the first time in years, the game felt open again. But openings in sport can be deceptive, because sometimes a legend goes quiet, not to disappear, but to gather what remains. And when Tiger returned, it was not youth that came back with him. It was something older, harder, more dangerous in its own way. Before that return, though, there was one statistic that explained the peak better than any trophy ever could. When Tiger led a major championship going into the final round, the rest of the field often looked like men delaying the inevitable. There are many ways to measure greatness in golf. Wins, major championships, weeks at number 1, prize money, records that survive one generation and intimidate the next. But there is one measure players trust more than all of them. What happens when the pressure is highest? And everyone knows it. That is where Tiger Woods became something close to myth. When Tiger held at least a share of the lead going into the final round of a major championship, he won 14 of 15 times. Read that quietly to yourself. 14 of 15. By Sunday morning, many tournaments already felt finished. The galleries sensed it. Broadcasters sensed it. Opponents certainly sensed it, because final rounds are usually built on doubt. Even great players wake on Sunday hearing questions in their own minds. Can I hold this lead? Can I survive one bad swing? Can I stay steady on the 18th green? Tiger seemed to wake with something else. Certainty. He once said there was no reason to enter a tournament unless you believed you could win it. For many players, that sounds like confidence. For Tiger, it sounded more like routine. That belief, joined to talent and discipline, created a kind of weight the rest of the field had to carry. They were not only trying to win a golf tournament, they were trying to interrupt a story that already felt written. And when players feel that, they often rush. They attack flags they should leave alone. They force putts that should die at the hole. They mistake urgency for courage. Tiger rarely needed help, but golf under pressure often gave it to him. His dominance was not limited to one magical season or one hot streak. 3 different times in his career, he won at least 5 consecutive PGA Tour events. His best run reached 7 in a row. Think about the steadiness required for that. Different courses, different weather, different fields, different forms of pressure. The same winner. He also made 142 consecutive cuts on the PGA Tour, a streak so long that many professionals considered it one of the most remarkable achievements in the sport. For years, while others feared missing the weekend, Tiger treated weekends like appointments. Then came an achievement that sounded impossible even as it happened. 4 consecutive major championships. not in the same calendar year, but in succession across 2 seasons. They called it the Tiger Slam. Every great player alive had a chance to stop it. None did. By then the question had changed. People no longer asked whether Tiger Woods was the best in the world. They asked whether anyone had ever looked this far above the world. And then, just when the myth seemed complete, life entered the story. Hard. For years the image had seemed untouchable. Tiger Woods was discipline, force, certainty. He was the name at the top of leaderboards and the figure walking through Sunday crowds as if the noise itself belonged to him. Then the image cracked. What followed was not a single fall. It was many. Private scandal became public spectacle. Headlines replaced scorecards. The game that had once revolved around Tiger began moving without him. Injuries arrived. Then more injuries after that. Surgeries accumulated. Backs do not forgive easily, and golf asks the spine to remember every mistake. There were mornings when getting out of bed looked harder than winning tournaments once had. That is how quickly power can change in sport. The man who had made others feel small now faced simple tasks that suddenly felt large. For younger players, the landscape opened. New names won majors. New faces carried the future. There are moments in every era when people decide, quietly and all at once, that the old king is gone. Many believed that moment had come, and they had reason. Tiger's swing was no longer young. His body no longer trusted repetition. The aura that once entered rooms before he did had been replaced by questions. Can he walk 4 days? Can he practice enough? Can he compete with men half his age? Can he bear one more disappointment in public? These are heavier burdens than a difficult bunker shot. Yet there was something people kept misunderstanding about Tiger Woods. They thought his greatest weapon had been youth. It had not. They thought it had been speed, strength, distance. It had not. Those things fade. What remained was the mind that had once terrified a generation. The patience. The refusal to surrender 1 hole, 1 round, 1 week. The ability to stand inside noise and hear only the next shot. That kind of strength ages differently. And in the spring of 2019, at Augusta National, the game was about to remember exactly who it had been dealing with all along. Augusta National has always understood memory. The trees seem to remember old champions. The fairways hold echoes better than most places in sport. Certain Sundays do not feel new at all. They feel as though history has simply chosen to speak again. In the spring of 2019, Tiger Woods arrived, carrying more scars than expectation. He was no longer the young man who overpowered courses. He was no longer the certainty who made fields uneasy on Wednesday night. The years had taken speed, freedom, and pieces of the body that once looked indestructible. What remained was experience, pain, and a stubbornness time had failed to remove. Many hoped he might contend. Few believed he would win. That is an important difference. Hope is polite. Belief is expensive. As the tournament moved towards Sunday, the leaderboard tightened. Younger men stood in front of him. Stronger men stood beside him. Men with freer swings and fewer medical files stood all around him. Tiger kept walking. No rush. No theater. No wasted movement. There are moments in great comebacks when the athlete seems to sense something before the crowd does. This was one of them. Others made mistakes. Augusta has a habit of asking difficult questions late in the day. Tiger had spent a lifetime answering harder ones, shot by shot. Hole be hole. The possibility grew heavier. Then it became real. When the final putt dropped, the sound that rose across Augusta was not the roar of surprise alone. It was recognition. People were not only cheering a victory, they were cheering everything that had once seemed gone. The children waiting near the green, the embrace, the walk through the crowd, the face of a man who had known public triumph, private ruin, physical pain, and the long humiliation of being doubted in public. This was his 15th major championship. His first had come 22 years earlier. Very few men in any sport return across that kind of distance. Fewer still return after the world has already written the ending for them. For some, it was the greatest comeback in golf. For others, something rarer. Proof that greatness can survive disgrace, survive injury, survive time itself, and when it was over, the full shape of Tiger Woods finally came into view. Not just the conqueror, not just the fallen idol, something more complicated than either. So what was Tiger Woods, really? To some, he was the most dominant golfer ever to live. the man who turned major championships into processions and made world-class players feel as though they had arrived one era too late. To others, he was a warning about fame, appetite, pride, and the cost of building a life in public view. Both versions are true. Neither version is complete. Tiger Woods was something rarer than a champion. He was a force that changed the emotional weather of a sport. Before him, great golfers were feared for scorecards, for trophies, for reputations built over years. Tiger introduced another kind of fear. Immediate fear, the kind that begins on the practice range, the kind that follows a name onto a leaderboard, the kind that makes experienced men feel rushed, smaller, less certain than they were the night before. That was his true distance from the field. Not yards off the tee, space inside the mind. Then life did what competition could not. It touched the private weaknesses no rival ever could. It bent the body that pressure could not bend. It reduced certainty to pain, routine to recovery, dominance to doubt. And still, somehow, he returned one last time to Augusta and reminded the game that memory can be dangerous too. Many athletes win titles. Some become icons. Very few alter the psychology of everyone around them. Tiger Woods did. That is why older champions still speak of him carefully. That is why younger players grew up in his shadow. That is why galleries still lean forward when his name is mentioned. Because long after power fades, the feeling remains. And that may be the final measure of greatness. Not how many trophies a man lifts, but how long the room changes after he walks in.